At what point do we stand up as just normal citizens and say, we're going to take part of this because we're the ones who are the most affected by these decisions that are made, right? As a blue collar worker, I suffer the consequences of every action or inaction that our elected officials take.
Kelly is a lifelong and third-generation Kern County resident. He is a family man with 4 children and has had a successful career in hotel and restaurant management, culminating as an operating supervisor at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. His career led him to serving some of America's biggest stars. His family has owned small businesses since he was 7 years old, and he has worked in it off and on ever since. He lives in Rosamond with his children, his longtime girlfriend, and his mom. He hopes to be the first Filipino-American elected to the Board of Supervisors in California history. In today's show, we discuss the differences between the Libertarian versus Democratic or Republican platforms. Later in the show, we talk about the issues facing the 2nd District. And then lastly, stay tuned to hear how Kelly defines success, and that is in your own happiness.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
I am John Duffield, CPA, and today we're interviewing Kelly Carden, who is running for County Supervisor position for District 2, and I'm excited to be able to interview him. Got a lot of energy, and I'm looking forward to that interview. Before we get into that interview, I'd like to encourage our subscribers to subscribe to our new YouTube page. If you go to YouTube and search Our 2 Cents Podcast on YouTube, our page will come up, and you'll see our little microphone logo, and then you'll be able to hit on that and subscribe to that. So, Kelly, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me.
Good. I'm glad to have you here. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday about politics, and I'm going to call it Kern County politics. And we talked about all the reasons why I would never run for political office, right? And so,
oh, man, yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of reasons not to. And I have a lot of reasons why I shouldn't, for the record. And so, anyways, let's dive in. Please tell our listeners about yourself and your latest challenge of running for Supervisor of District 2.
Yeah. So, John, thanks again for having me on today.
You bet.
I decided in the middle of the pandemic that I was going to do my part and take my shot, and I was going to run for office. It kind of happened when everything we were shut down, and then all of a sudden all the bills started going up. They approved a land use increase, the water increase. All of these things are going up, and I started saying to myself, holy cow, people are not working and they're raising bills. Like, what if I was a senior?
Raising fees, you mean?
Yeah, raising all these fees, and it's resulting in the trash fee going up, of course, and then they have a gate fee now with the dump starting on July 1st. It's incredible, and it's just like, holy cow, at what point do we slow down and we start looking at other options other than just constantly raising people's taxes?
I see. And so that was kind of the impetus at that time of you seeing all these fee increases and kind of looking at government, and that was kind of the thing that kind of drove that motivation, right?
Well, yeah, and then, you start going to these meetings and you hear people that are pouring their hearts out to their elected officials. Please, wait, is there anything else we can do? To be really just feel ignored, and to feel like as if they're being looked down upon. And I realized, holy cow, that's not what I expect out of my elected officials. And that's certainly not how I would treat my friends, family, and neighbors who I would hope vote for me. Sure.
So you make that decision and you go, hey, this is something I think I need to get involved in. Tell us what that looks like. So you're a regular kind of citizen out there, in District 2, and you're looking at and you're seeing some of those things. What next?
So the first thing I did was I wrote a letter to my wife. To my girlfriend, Shauna. We've been together for almost 11 years. She's given me beautiful children. She's my life partner, and she's the most important person in my life. So I said, okay, before I can do anything, I had to know what she thought about this.
Right.
So I wrote a letter, and I handed it to her, and I walked out of the room, and I said, hey, I need you to read this. And maybe 20 minutes later, she came out, and she said, are you really want to do this? I said, I've already sent it to the newspaper.
So was it a request letter like, hey, can I do this? Or I'm doing it?
At that point, I would have been able to still back out. I could have said, hey, please don't run that.
Right.
But no, I just felt like, at what point do we stand up as just normal citizens and say, we're going to take part of this because we're the ones who are the most affected by these decisions that are made.
Sure.
Right. As a blue collar worker, I suffer the consequences of every action or inaction that our elected officials take.
Yes.
significantly more than they do. You know, I don't have the built-in salary and fringe benefits that come along with their gas with their gas being paid for by the county and whatnot, you know. So I had to really worry, like, oh my gosh, like if I have 4 children, John, I'm going to have 4 teenagers at the same time. 2 of them are going to be girls. If the water bill keeps going up, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Right. Yeah. You look at that, a little bit of a personal effect from that. So what do you do at that point, right? So you get buy-in from your wife, right? And she says, let's go do that. Then what?
So then I approached my party, you know, my political party, about what kind of help they can give me, you know, and they started kind of pointing me in the right direction. I started making appearances across the county. I started speaking out at the Board of Supervisors meetings, as well as school board meetings and city council meetings, and just making myself heard and sharing the opinions of the people that aren't able to make it to these awkward meeting times.
Right.
You know, it's almost by design that these times are in the middle of the day or late at night in the middle of the week when most citizens can't attend. What I would do is I would go to Mojave and I'd talk to a bunch of citizens and I'd go and I'd speak on their behalf. You know, oh, people agree with me. You know, when you're able to explain yourself well, people want to see that. They want to see actionable statements made, not just platitudes by politicians.
Sure.
And I think that the support started building from there.
You said Mojave, so let's back out a little bit. Tell us about District 2 and what area that encompasses, and then what some of those issues you believe are important for District 2.
So District 2 is the southeastern portion of Kern County. It's the largest landmass out of the 5 supervisorial districts. It includes Rosamond, the Air Force Base, Mojave, Tehachapi, Cal City, and Boron, and then Maricopa, Taft, Fraser Park, and then parts of southeast Bakersfield.
It's really South Kern County and then southeastern Kern County, right?
Yeah.
It is a very large landmass. There is no doubt about it. So it is some of the rural communities, you know, that we have, right? You know, relative to Bakersfield, but it encompasses a lot of area.
Well, if you look at the map, if you look at the towns and the cities that are in our district, we have the highest percentage of unincorporated towns. Right. I mean, literally half of the population centers in the 2nd district are unincorporated. They're fully dependent upon the county, and every one of them, if you talk to people from Fraser Park, I talked to a guy yesterday from Fraser Park, Boron, they all feel as if their towns are the redheaded stepchilds of the county.
Sure.
And at what point do we hear them? You know, because certainly right now they're not.
It's some degree of odd representation, right? Because they are those unincorporated areas. They don't feel as though they're getting the same amount of attention. That district, so let's go back. What are the issues that you feel like that are really relevant to that? I mean, you just made the comment that they feel like they're not heard, but are there specific issues that you feel that are not being addressed for those areas? Well,
absolutely. I mean, we're just like everywhere in the county, we're incredibly infected by the lack of police that we have in our current sheriff's department.
Sure.
You know, every single of one of the unincorporated towns I mentioned, Mojave, Rosamond, Boron, and Fraser Park, Lebec areas, they don't have deputies after night. They're dispatched from other towns. You know, so that's not okay.
Right.
You know, call help and so yeah, I was talking to people from Fraser Park yesterday, and the guy makes a comment to his buddy. He goes, "Man, they only took 45 minutes to arrive. That's great."
Right. They're on the ball.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, like what? You know, and then so it becomes a matter of being out of touch, right? We all read in Chairman Scrivener's re-election letter that he will continue to provide first-class public safety services to the residents of the 2nd district. What is he talking about?
Sure.
We don't have any police. But the reality is where he lives has plenty of police. So he doesn't see our reality past his own. We're affected by the solar issues. You know, we have people all over the desert towns that are complaining about the extra dust being put up. It's, again, not being heard. You know, hey, can we get these solar panels pushed back a little bit? And then instead they went to these meetings and were told, how dare they stand in the way of other people monetizing their land? You know, and it's, again, and Mayor, whether that's true or not, like, these are your voters you're talking to.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Well, I think, and ultimately as a supervisor, you've got to make a decision in the end, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you're elected, you get yourself in a position that you've got to hear everybody, pay respect to everybody that's going to vote for you or not vote for you, and then ultimately you've got to make a decision in the end, right? And
absolutely. I just think there's some tact involved with that.
Sure.
And there's ways, first off, to be in the community. These people, in Boron, they complained, for instance, about the Aratina project, that when they went to the meeting, they weren't answered any of their questions.
Right.
They went to a Q&A session and not a single question was answered.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't feel good. So forgive me for this because I like you, but you're running for District 2, an area long held by Zach Scrivener. Mm-hmm. What makes you think you can beat him?
So I think the fact that I'm just completely different when you speak to me. You know, I don't just double down on things that we've done in the past. I have actionable solutions for every question that you can come up with. right?
Right.
Which helps. I think that at this point, the negative name recognition for him isn't exactly great for him either. You know, he's unfortunately attached himself to a handful of issues where people are just tired of it.
Sure.
The issues a couple years ago with the defund the police memes and contracts being canceled. You know, I think that really rubbed people the wrong way.
Right.
You know, the issues of he voted against solar panels in his town, but he voted for them in mine.
Right.
You know, it's like, I mean, I think that people are just ready for a change. I know I'm ready for a change. Sure. I know that that in national politics, and I believe it's really at every level, people are so tired of the just the same old thing every day.
Yeah, sure. I have to say this. I'm going to jump out of line with how my questions, because I had questions or point on this, and so it feels like there's so much kind of false news out there, and we've had that really at the national political level, but it feels like at the point to what can we believe, honestly, right? When it's coming from media, when it's coming from the news, what can you believe? And so, that being said, tell me about you and why should we believe you as opposed to anybody else, right?
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, I think when you look at me and you start, after you've spoken to me, I think people realize that I'm living the same lives that they are.
Sure.
Right. And I think that the ability to be actionable, the ability to be empathetic with one another, and also to show that, hey, when these things happen, I struggle too.
Right.
My mother's had a business for 30 years. And when COVID came, she had to figure out how to keep her business open.
Right.
Without any help or assistance and nobody answering phones to the county trying to help walk us through these processes.
Sure.
So I think that my ability to show myself as a member of the community is huge. I think that, again, people are just ready for blue collar workers. And I've pledged for term limits already. I've promised to only, if elected, only get reelected one more time, and then that's it for me.
Yeah. So you're not going to become that lifelong politician is not what you're striving for.
I just want to go back to work at some point.
Right.
I want to go back and cook.
Yeah. Right. Make some change, hopefully affect some change and then kind of go back to what you love doing. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're running on a libertarian candidate, platform as opposed to that typical Democratic or Republican platform. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I used to be a Republican. I grew up my whole life as a Kern County conservative Republican. And then as I got older, I start noticing that I agree with them on fewer and fewer things that I was justifying ignoring to support one, two, or three things.
Sure.
But they weren't supporting those things either. So at one point I said, I can't do this anymore. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. 2020 came, there was no way I was voting for either one of these guys.
Right.
So I started looking at other options. I found the Libertarian Party, a party where I may not agree with everything, but I certainly agree with more than I did as a Republican.
Sure.
And I went that way.
Yeah, interesting. So I hate to admit this, but I cannot say that I truly understand the libertarian platform and the differences in their philosophical views. Help educate me and our listeners about that to some degree.
Yeah. So the easiest way that I can explain that is to not hurt people and not take their things. That's really the limits of what being a libertarian is. You're allowed to believe what you're allowed to believe. You're allowed to practice and live your life in the way you're allowed to live your life, so long as you're not negatively impacting me. And that works in every level. Property rights, polluters, people that damage our world. If we believe that the most inalienable rights are personable rights, then I think there's a level of respect that goes.
Sure. Yeah, tell me more about that, though. Give me some different examples as to how some Democrat might treat something versus a Republican might typically versus some Libertarian would.
Okay, so what typically the Republicans and Democrats do is they use the government, or they write our laws to force people to act a certain way. So there's a book called The Law. It's written by Frederic Bastiat. He was a French economist and philosopher, and he dictated that the law was supposed to be used to prevent horrible things from happening, not to force people to live a certain way. So it's a downward pressure where they're constantly playing off each other. Right now they're talking about a ministry of truth. The Republicans saying it's bad, but I promise you, if they took over, they're not getting rid of it. They're going to use it for whatever their objectives are too.
Sure.
So It's just, I think it's about seeing through the hypocritical nature of our government and our political parties.
Yeah. It's hard to know as that typical layperson out here on the street to honestly, get enough information about somebody that's running for that political office and what you might believe about that and kind of to understand, take us a position. I think we're all kind of the mindset that we go down the line and we go, hey, is this a Democratic versus a Republican candidate? And then we do that. Unfortunately, I shouldn't admit this, but this is what I actually do. I go down the list, and if I find something that I don't feel like I'm educated enough on, I don't vote. And so that, I know that sounds really odd.
Well, no, it's not. It's actually the proper thing to do. If what that shows is that you're showing a commitment to educating yourself to take part in the political process.
Sure.
And if more people did that, we would have better elections. We would have better candidates. I mean, we wouldn't have the infighting that we see that constantly happen when you see the Democrats want to fight over, COVID or any issue, and the Republicans do the same thing. These fake fights over the Second Amendment, and it's a downward pressure that comes from them being really holding all the cards.
Yep. So how long, so you said the last time that you voted Libertarian for the first time, right?
I did. In 2020, I voted for Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen.
Mm-hmm. And so the Libertarian policy here, party here in Kern County, is it an active party?
We have an active party here. We have, I think it's 28 dues paying members. Okay. We meet every month at a studio here in town. We have a buddy that has a recording studio. Mm-hmm. And we do outreaches, we do cleanups, we do different things that we can. We raise money and donate them to projects that are happening. We really believe in single issue coalitions, right? And what that means is we can really partner with anybody because any organization out there, we can find something that we get along with.
Sure. Yeah. We all have a lot in common, right? It's if we can get past the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. The only ones who say that we have anything different are the Republicans and Democrats. But then when you start talking to people, you realize people have the same struggles in their lives.
Sure.
People have the same hopes in their lives. We want to be able to provide for our families. We want to be able to provide for ourselves as we age.
Yeah, I think for the most part, most of us are such that 90% of our philosophical views line up. It's that 10% or that 5% that's way out there on the edge that we don't always agree with. So it's really that middle moderate for the most part.
Yeah, and if we can start agreeing on those things and then giving some more liberty on some of the other things, imagine how much less we would fight.
Yeah, sure. A lot of things to fight about. So tell us about your day job and what you've been doing on that. And I know you've got some interesting things about your heritage and kind of your mom's background. So tell us about those parts.
Well, so personally, I've always worked in hotels and restaurants. I've been a hospitality professional for 18 years, and then in the middle, I was also a youth pastor for about 2.5 years in Las Vegas.
Okay.
I lived and worked in the projects for about 2 years at the Las Vegas Dream Center. And really just gave myself a new example of the new perspective on how you see things.
Sure.
The first time you knock on a door giving outreach, and the door opens and everyone's sitting on the floor because they don't have furniture.
Sure.
It changes you.
Yeah.
It changes the way you see things.
Yeah, it changes the way you see things for sure.
And, but other than that, I've worked in some of the nicest hotels in Nevada. I also was working at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. That's where I was most recently an operations manager.
I saw that in your bio, man. What an interesting job that was. Tell me about that.
Oh man, I was working at another account for the same company called Sodexo, and one day we got an email from the library. They're asking for help for catering. So I said, overtime, I'm down. Let's go. And then we're cooking for Ben Shapiro.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa! I got to cook in the Reagan's private residence. I've cooked for George Bush. I've cooked for Gary Sinise, Gloria Gaynor. I think the highlight of my career is at the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, I got to cook for Buzz Aldrin.
Wow.
And how cool is that? Like, I'm just some kid from the desert in Rosamond.
Yeah, sure.
And I was there when it almost caught on fire in 2019. The goats, they credit with saving it because they have a herd of goats that live in the hills there and they eat all the weeds. Right. and that guy, he's got 2 dogs. One of them's real mean. It's chased me all the way up that hill before.
Right.
And then I got to help cook at the Reagan Defense Forum in 2020. It included heads of state. It included all security ministers from across the world, all of our allies. It was just really cool to be part of these things.
Sure.
But I think my favorite job is always going to be our family business.
Right.
My mother opened her store when I was 7 years old. And I remember getting, after school or after sports on the weekends, having to go to work, and I would carry the baskets for the older ladies who would come in and shop. And my mom would pay me in gummy worms.
That's what's your favorite.
Yeah.
Right?
Then I got a little older and I said, hey mom, I don't want gummy worms anymore. I'm big now. Can we do baseball cards instead?
Right.
And then finally she started paying me a couple bucks an hour in the late 90s. And I had the chance to run that for her. She actually went to the Philippines one time to go visit family, and I got to take time off school and run that for a couple weeks for her. And at 17 years old, doing payroll, shopping for the store. I remember going to the wholesalers and refilling restocking our shelves. So I've always had these just unbelievably cool areas of responsibility. My sister left my nephew with us, and I got to raise my nephew, help my mom raise my nephew. He's about 10 years younger than I am, and I've raised him his whole life. He's 23 now. It's just, I just think that through all of the things that I've been through, that I've developed these skills, I've learned and observed these things that I think translate well to representing people.
Sure. No, listen, I appreciate that. And you said something interesting to me. You said I've had all these cool responsibilities, right? And including raising your nephew. And I think that's incredible and it's admirable, but I don't know that I personally would have said that that's cool, right? Just because of the true responsibility that is, right?
No, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Being able to wake up and just learn how, okay, it's not just me, I get to take care of it at a young age. It was just really neat.
Sure. Yeah, I have kind of what I call one of my adopted sons that has a new responsibility. He actually works at one of the local schools, and so he's working with youth, and this kid gave more grief to the school teachers and everybody that worked at the school when he was growing up, and I asked him how his first day on the job was, and he said, well, I got cussed at the first day on the job by a 7-year-old, and he said, so I guess payback is coming my way. And I said,
yeah. I mean, I get that. I wasn't a bad student. Like, I never got in trouble, but I also didn't really care to be in school.
Sure.
I think this is like, okay, can we just get to the test? Like, my teachers used to get so mad with me because I would get A's on all of my tests and never turn in any of my homework.
Right.
So I'm still learning.
Just blessed that way to absorb it from that perspective. What have I not asked you that our listeners need to know about you?
Oh man, let's talk about my mom. So I have a really cool background. My mother was actually born in the Philippines in 1949. My grandfather, he was a guerrilla fighter during World War II. My grandmother was an illiterate housewife. She, when she died, she couldn't spell her own name. But a couple years before she died, she got to go to Sacramento, and they swore her in as an American citizen, and She made her mark. She drew an X.
Right.
And that's just, it's so cool.
Sure.
So from there, my mom, so she was a child laborer at 6 years old. At 11, she had to drop out of school to work more. At 13, she was an American war bride. Come to a whole new country, been an American citizen 50 years, homeowner for 40 years. Wow. She's been a business owner for 30 years now.
Wow. That's awesome. Then we start looking at what's our excuse, right? When we start to hear those things.
Well, and so that's just it, is what's our excuse. Right. So in the middle of the pandemic, 2020, I took my family across the country. We actually ended up in Shiloh, in Tennessee, at the Battle of Shiloh. And when you walk into the national park, there's a cemetery, and they have a lot of the Union soldiers that died in the battle are buried there. And you're walking through, my son, he would have been 8 at the time, says, "Dad, how come most of the graves only have numbers?" And I explained to him how people were recruited to the military back then, and how if the only people that knew your name were your buddies and they all died, then you become a number.
Sure.
And at the entrance to the cemetery, there's a headstone. It's for the little drummer boy of Shiloh. They think he was 13 years old. He was stationed on the Hornet's Nest, which is where the heaviest fighting came. And he beat his damn drum until he died.
Wow.
What's our excuse?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And our founding fathers were they weren't wise, 70-year-old individuals that did this, right? They were all, farmers that were in their teens or 20s that, kind of founded this nation from that perspective. So, what's our excuse from that perspective? You made a comment earlier that kind of resonated with me, and we were talking about kind of standing out and doing something about it. And, we're doing a podcast, and I'm a huge podcaster. I have so many podcasts on my cell phone that I listen to. And one of the podcasts that I listen to is really kind of a loudmouth, foul-mouthed kind of bully that or people would call him that. But the biggest thing that he does is yelling all the time is, why are we not standing up and making a difference is what we believe in, right? And so we all too many of us tend to be passive and not taking that active role in what affects our local government and those things that we do. We're dependent on somebody else and we blindly vote, to some degree. And
so that's huge. What you just said is that we blindly vote. And then what happens is every 2 years or 4 years, we get told that, we're voting for the lesser of two evils.
Sure.
Let me tell you what it is when we vote for the lesser of two evils. We are saying that we will give away a better tomorrow for our kids for an easier today for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's an easier today for ourselves by not taking action, right?
Yeah, but you notice I didn't say it was a good day. We're not even trading better days for good days. We're trading better days for easier days.
Yeah, easier, right? That's the thing. Well, I think we're all guilty of that. We're all guilty of doing what. Yeah, for sure, I am too. Is what's easier, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to sometimes taking that hard road that's as they say less traveled. So, what else do we need to know about you?
Oh man, so I have 4 beautiful children. Rodney's 11. Today's actually his birthday, so happy birthday,
nice.
son.
Happy birthday, Rodney.
I'm gonna go get him an ice cream cake from here. So
you better.
Yeah, it'll be awesome. I have a daughter named Naomi. She's in 3rd grade. She's 8.
Okay.
Then Elisa is my younger daughter. So all of my siblings, I'm the youngest of 5. They named I have nieces and nephews that are named in variations of my mom's name.
Okay. Wow.
Elicia, Annalisa. There's Rennie Shalisa. There's like 6 or 7. So I'm the youngest. So when I had my last daughter, I said, I'm just gonna name her after my mom. So she's little Elisa.
Oh, wow.
And then I have another son. His name's Anderson. He's 5. He's in TK.
Okay.
He has long red hair. It's down to his butt. It's only been cut once. We took 7 or 8 inches off last year. Uh-huh. And he's my little Tarzan,
Right.
And so I joke because his name's Anderson, and he's the only one of my kids that we didn't name after anybody, right? I mean, part of my Filipino heritage is we just recycle our family's names. That's how we honor people from the past. And but with him, I couldn't think of any names. I had too many kids, had any more names on standby. And I had just watched the Hatfields and McCoys, and Devil Anse Hatfield's name was Anderson, and he was played by Kevin Costner.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'm going to use that one.
Right,
right. My wife
wife
swears that that's not it, but that's part of the way I like the name.
That's how it happens.
And he's actually in the same classroom that I sat in for kindergarten 31 years ago.
Wow.
And his teacher, her first year of teaching was my kindergarten year. She was in the room next door. And now she's his teacher, and I'm pretty sure it's her last year, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool to grow up in the same community and see that.
Oh yeah, so when I was a kid, my stepdad. My mom comes to America. She gets divorced from her first husband. My sibling's parent, or my sibling's dad. She meets my dad in Los Angeles, and then has me. And unfortunately, my dad was sick. He died of cancer when I was 2 months old. So my mom used the life insurance money. So first off, she tried to get life insurance. She had purchased it previously, and then they denied her. They said that, he died too soon. He must have known he was sick. Like, how heartless, right? And so she actually found a lawyer. She called lawyer after lawyer, and she actually found a woman who was from Europe. She was a European immigrant. And she said, I'll write as many letters as I need to for you for free. We're going to get you your money. She went to the welfare office, and she said, hey, I need help. And they said, well, you need to go get a job. I'm unfortunately, mom had an emergency cesarean section with me. So she wasn't a matter of just going back to work. She wasn't even cleared. So the landlord said, don't pay rent until after the first of the year, because that's when Social Security kicks in. My uncles and their friends, they spoke to the local dealer, and they said, hey, we're going to buy all of our nickel sacks from her instead. They figured it out. It's community.
Sure.
But the 3 or 4 instances where she reaches out to the government for help, she kept getting told no.
Sure.
And then what makes it criminal as somebody? Because they refuse to help. I think that's a problem. So we could talk about any of these issues in Kern County. Homelessness is a huge issue. We see it every day that I drive through the desert, there's more and more people in the desert. It's heartbreaking. So how do we fix this? Well, we fix it by addressing the root causes and root issues.
Sure.
Not the political problems.
Right.
Right. So, and what are those? Well, most of them are drug addiction and mental health addiction or mental health illness.
Yeah, mental health problems.
But the problem in our county is that most of the resources are predicated to get to receiving help are predicated around getting arrested, charged, and convicted of a crime. But I don't think you should have to ruin your life to get help.
Not ideally, right?
No.
I mean, that doesn't help your cause, right? When you've got those negative marks on your on your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and I think that if we started addressing some of those issues, first off, it's the fiscally conservative thing to do for all the Republicans listening. There's nothing fiscally conservative about sending people to prison for $107,000 a year.
Sure.
But at the same time, there needs to be some kind of programs available for people that want access to them.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you. I can't sit here and suggest that I know the answer for the record, right? I mean, we can obviously see that it's a problem, and it's fascinating for me to sit back and be able to watch and see that our unemployment rate is kind of at lifetime lows, if you will. And so there's all these these open job opportunities and everything else, and at the same time we've got this huge this huge homeless problem. And so
but I'm always kind of tickled by that because, like, currently everywhere says they're hiring, and I have a lot of friends that keep saying they apply. They never get callbacks. But that's a reality, unfortunately, for a lot of larger corporations. They take advantage of software that skims through your resume and will eliminate you based on certain words that you've picked.
Sure.
So
well, and I think to some degree, by the way, I'm an employer, and I think some of it's effort based, right? And so, one of the things that happens with me is when we run job ads, is we typically get somewhat depending on the nature of the position, we can get inundated with applicants. And the frustrating part about it for me, Kelly, I have to say this, is that, I might say in that job ad that you have to have some very specific previous experience for these particular positions. And then I'll get applicants that have obviously ignored that. Now, some of that is coming from whatever job applicant board, that ZipRecruiter or whatever it happens to be, that's just, feeding stuff at us, right? But at the same point in time, it feels like I should get more effort from somebody that honestly wants to go take the time and actually wants that job application, right? And so
certainly,
it's effort on their part is really.
Oh, absolutely. We're not waiving responsibility. I mean, in the end, it's personal responsibility is everything, right?
Right.
And as a small business owner, though, I think that you're better prepared to handle those things than large corporations.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I might argue that with you to some degree, and I'll say it from this perspective, right? We're small enough that we don't really have that HR department, right? We don't actually have that resource. And so we don't have that person dedicated. That person that's dedicated to that, by the way, happens to be me. And so, my clients want me staying busy, focusing on their work and doing what we do as an accounting firm. And so, sifting through resumes and trying to determine ultimately what that best candidate is, that's a very difficult thing. And so I don't, when it comes to organizations that actually have HR departments, I don't think they have an excuse, in my opinion, because they've got somebody that's kind of dedicated to that process. And so
I had worked at the Nugget Casino Resort in Reno, in Sparks, Nevada, just outside of Reno. Yep. And I ended up there as the hotel manager for a couple of years. And I applied the week before, and I got immediately within minutes, we're not interested. I said, man, that's weird. Like I'm wildly qualified for this, And I said, whatever. And then the next week, and I actually had a friend there who was a hotel manager that she's the one who told me to apply. And the next week they had a job fair. And I went to the job fair, and it was the VP of the HR department is actually the one who did my interview. And she looks at my resume and she goes, "You're exactly why we do these things, because we need people like you to apply." I said, well, newsflash, I applied last week and I was told no. And then when I called the HR department, they basically yelled at me when I was like, "Are you sure you can't pull this?"
Right.
And I was like, so yeah, that's what I'm saying is that sometimes they get, and I guess there's never a right or wrong answer, right?
Yeah, Kelly, that's why nothing's a perfect process, by the way, including government, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that I find small businesses that are easier to react to. If you had 10 people that were unqualified, at least you can go through all 10 and decide which one was the most qualified. Sure. If you absolutely had to, versus like a larger corporation would just kick them all to the pile and wait until something perfect came along.
Yeah, sure. We're getting off a little tangent a little bit, and I'll tell you a story off the air about that very subject.
Oh, yeah.
Before I let you go, what else have we not learned about you?
Oh man, I mean, I don't know how we're in Kern County. We got to talk about water. You know, I mean, everyone complains, and what happens is government, they admit that water is a state issue. So we make that a local issue by focusing on our first off, our local governments leading the way with conservation. They need to be the ones who are taking their grass out, not us at our houses. You know, they raised the rate in Rosamond for the water, and and literally at the meeting where they raised the rate for the water, they were installing sod and their property. You know, so I think it's shifting the responsibility back to the people who are the most responsible to make it, which is our governments, you know, focusing on conservation, focusing on cleaning water and keeping our aquifers full, you know. I think that's how we make it a local issue to kind of alleviate some of those things.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of issues out there for the record, and I got to tell you, I'm excited for you. I'm glad you have the boldness to go run for office. I can't tell you that I personally would have been that person that would want to go do that, and so I'm excited for you and that opportunity going forward. So, you know,
in a million years, I would have never thought that I would have done this. You know, I just wanted to work, wanted to raise my kids, wanted to be in my little town and go on vacation when I wanted to go on vacation. You know, and then, so I'm not running for me, you know, and I tell people, and I'm serious when I say this, it's not for me. If I lose, I'm perfectly fine. I'm running because I believe that my neighbors are being unheard and they're being left behind. I'm running because we have towns in the middle of the desert that don't have any protection at all. And the people that are dependent upon them to provide that protection insist that they're providing first-class services to these same towns. You know, so at some point the little man has to speak up, and if it's me, then so be it. And I'll be the one who provides that mouthpiece.
Sure, I'm glad that you're doing. I look forward to seeing that, watching that race, and wish you the best of success. One of the things that we always do with our guests is we hit them with a couple of what we call kind of rapid fire questions, and so here we go on that. If I may, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh man. So one time, someone told me, they said, I was moving back into my girlfriend. We were figuring things out after a breakup. Yep. He said, Kelly, you got to decide what's more important, being right or your happiness or your principles or your sanity. Right. And he said, but the thing is sometimes you have to stick up for those things. So make sure you have a really comfortable couch. That way you're not afraid to sleep on it.
Right. Because you can stand up for your principles, right?
And then at least you'll be able to get a good night's sleep out of it.
Right. That's great. That's great life advice for sure. What book do we have to read and why?
Oh man, I mentioned earlier The Law by Frederick Bastiat. It's a short essay. It's a great introduction to libertarianism. It explains how the laws hurt people rather than help people. That's the one that I would read. And it talks about general plunder. How is it that the government gets stronger and stronger and stronger while the citizenry gets poorer and poorer and poorer?
Right. Yeah. It does feel like government gets bigger for sure. And you know, don't see, it doesn't seem to see that change, you know, that change turning. If you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, and actually get through, right? So you're talking to your 18-year-old self, but that 18-year-old self would actually hear you. What would that be?
I would tell myself to just slow down. You know, life's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't have to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish in your first couple of years. There's no timeline. You don't have to be married by a certain point. You don't have to have kids by a certain point. Success can only be measured by where you see yourself and your own happiness. So that's what I would tell myself.
That's awesome. I love that very much. And you're right. Everybody's definition of success is their own, right? Yeah.
You know, you look at someone like my mother. She doesn't need anything else than that. You know, she literally came from nothing. You know, so I was talking to her a couple weeks ago. We were talking about aid in the Philippines. And she was telling me when she was 4 years old that there was a typhoon. And they went to the governor's house or the mayor's house for aid. And they handed her a moldy block of cheese. You know, so, I mean, perspective's everything.
Sure.
You know, I asked my grandfather one time. My grandfather, like I said, he mentioned he was a guerrilla war fighter. He witnessed the Bataan Death March. He unfortunately been through some things. And I said, Grandpa, what was the best day of your life? You know, happiest day ever. Nothing could ever come close. He was probably in his late 80s when I asked him. And he said, oh, that's easy. And so I'm thinking, okay, we had 11 kids, got to be one of their births. He'd been married twice. His second wife was 40 years younger than him. If there's a happy point, there's that one, right? Let's be honest.
Right.
And he goes, I'll never forget. I was about 25 years old. No, man, he was about 23 years old. And the war had been going on forever. The Americans had been gone for so long. They were fighting for years, almost 2 years they've been fighting. And he said they were down at the beach and they were scavenging for food. And he heard it first, ta, 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 ta. And they looked up, and over the top of the trees were the planes. They were dogfighting. And they ran back to the village telling everyone, the Americans are back. Imagine that being the happiest day of your life.
Well, listen, imagine that that's the case, right? But for him having to live through that, right, then that would be a pretty happy day, right? So to having to endure that.
He was like the happiest little fella ever. And he was all of like 5'2". He just was funny, and he worked hard. So when they came to America, he was like the original can man, right? Like him and my grandma, they'd go get cans and bottles. And my mom had bought him this little Datsun pickup. It was like a 78 Datsun pickup. And this would have been the late 80s, early 90s, And one time my uncle brings me home from school, and my grandfather is standing on top of a ladder. It's like a 6-foot ladder. He's on the very top of it, and he's loading boxes of crushed cans onto his truck. He'd go like 10 boxes high and then drive down the road. It was insane. But it was just how he was. Everything was easy for him. He never lost his cool.
Yep.
And that's what I hope to bring. I hope to I don't like to be ruffled. I don't like to be in a panic, and I don't think there's ever really a reason to be. So I think there's a good sense of calmness that I bring.
Yeah, no, there definitely is from that perspective. And I got to tell you, some of that comes from your mom, and I wish I would have had the opportunity to meet her, by the way. And I say that in part because, all of your siblings and family members have, she made such an impact on their lives, right, that they felt compelled to include her name as part of those kids' names. That's pretty incredible.
So what I've had happen over this last year is dozens and dozens and dozens of people ask my mom for interviews, and she's just not ready yet, But yeah, no, my family's cool. Like my oldest brother Rodney, he's a high school teacher, been teaching for 20 years. He coaches sports too. My sister Christy, she's there, and they're all grandparents. I have nieces and nephews that are my age. Christy is a trucking manager for a major corporation. My brother William, he's kind of the black sheep, but he's really the example. He's the one who went from being in prison to being incredibly successful at the end of his life. My sister Amber has great kids too. But it's because the examples that we had in front of us.
Sure.
And I think that's even as a libertarian is what it's about. Is the Libertarian Party's been around for 50 years, and I think it's finally gaining steam. And it's not just how do we push this forward, it's how do we honor those that came first. And I think that's more than everything. In Kern County, that's important. Who came first? How do we honor them?
Sure. Listen, we're going to wrap it up today. I thank you so very much for coming in. I look forward to watching that race and seeing your success. It's exciting that you've done that and kind of taken that on. I wish you the best of luck.
Hey, man, I sure thank you. And again, thank you so much for having me on.
You bet. Thank you.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, and Dave Plivlich, President and CEO of the Marcom Group and MarcomBranding.com. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.